There are hundreds and thousands of brands of Scotch whisky already out there. And then there are hundreds and hundreds more brought to us by independent bottlers. Where do these independent bottlers come from? Why do they exist? What have they got to offer? And why would we choose an independent bottler over an official bottling? That's what we're going to talk about tonight and explore. Pour yourself a dram, put up your feet, and relax. Hello, whiskey folk. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to another Thursday night. I hope you're all doing very, very well in these strange, strange times. We have to kind of acknowledge the times that we're living in right now. We know that it's difficult and it's challenging for everyone, but in these environments, we can kind of just relax in a little bit of whiskey community, pour a dram and take some time away from it and try our best not to talk about the C word, of course. Welcome, everybody. It's fantastic to see so many of you in. There was well over 150 of you in tonight before the pub doors were opened. We had some technical issues and we were delayed by a minute or so, but we got it together. These are challenging times on the internet right now because all the networks, all the servers, everything is being saturated right now because everybody's taken to technology. But hopefully I'm coming through clear just now and you'll tell me if there's anything happening otherwise. Fantastic to see you all. Of course, I've got a guest tonight. I'm really, really privileged to be joined by Fred Laing to talk about the subject of independent bottlers tonight, and we'll get to welcome in Fred just shortly. But I wanted to talk about that concept of independent bottlers. Sometimes in some markets, it's difficult to get your hands on them, but they do represent a very different thing. And that's what I want to talk about tonight. What value they bring to us, how they've come about to be, and why we might consider choosing them over, say, an official bottling. I hope that's an interesting discussion for you. Let's jump into the lounge and say hello and welcome to all of you fantastic barflies. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for waiting for us. Already I've got a virtual dram bought for me by Lee Kerwin. He's saying, just ordered a bottle of Dalmore Portwood Reserve and will hopefully arrive before my birthday on 11th of April. Lee, I'm going to raise a wee glass and I'll say, I know it's a little bit ahead of time, but many happy returns when the night comes. And I hope your treat that you bought yourself arrives in plenty of time for you to enjoy it. Cheers, Lee. Thank you for your virtual dram, my friend. And Pete James has also given me a huge thumbs up and bought me a virtual dram as well. Cheers, Pete. Thank you very much. I hope that everybody is in good shape and healthy. Malt Chronicles is here. Fantastic, Bart. Good to see you. Tony Evans is here as well. Wonderful. Jimmy Jazz. And Tony Evans is saying the C word. I would love to talk about Kleinleash. Yes, that will be our preferred C word tonight, Tony. That's a great idea. Fantastic. Jorgen Dale is in saying, evening, Roy. Looks like a new name, Jorgen. If it is, welcome, my friend. Wonderful to see you. Daniel Vermaas and Billy Saunders in attendance too, you stars. Sevi, Craig Severin, the Alchemist. Thank you so much, my friend. Nice to see you. You're always in here in support, and it's great to have you along tonight as well, my fellow bottle chaser from Glasgow. Ben Demon Hunter is here as well as Peter Wilcox and Radek as well. You stars, good to see you. Jimmy Legg, my friend Blair from Canada is also in attendance. Wonderful to see you, Jimmy, as well as Donald Rance from Canada. Jonathan Flowers, you star. I hope that you and Jean are doing very, very well and keeping healthy. Greg's Whiskey Guide from France, he's here. Zenbud, Orange Wool, Eric Evanson, Jeffrey Pellegrini. Listen, we're well over 200 people in already. It's going to be really tough for me to give everyone a shout out, but just to say thank you for everybody for participating, and I hope you can be patient with us tonight. I will try to pick out questions from you. If you're trying to get my attention, do what the chat is doing right now and type Aqvavitae and it's highlighted orange for me. I just want to say, if you're new, if this is your new time in as well, it might help you if I give you a little bit of insight as to how to can I use this live chat thing? I'm getting lots of messages to say, Roy, I can't interact. How do I do that? This is going out live to YouTube and to Facebook at the same time. If you're on Facebook, just chat underneath the video as you normally would, and hopefully I can try to pick up some of your comments from Facebook as well. Most of the community is hanging out on YouTube in the live chat window in YouTube. If you can't see that right now, if you're on a PC or a Mac and you're in the browser window, just look down here. There should be a button that says live chat. If you click on that, if you're in a mobile device, hold it in portrait mode quickly like this, and you see the buttons coming up. You can tap live chat. It brings up the chat just like this. You can see everybody talking to each other. And that's how you can chat. It's more difficult on a touchscreen device, of course, to chat with the keyboard thing, but that's how you're able to interact. And if you're in the chat room, you suddenly find yourself in the lounge. And if you're in the lounge, you find yourself against hanging out with all the wonderful whiskey folk and dedicated barflies that are in there. They're a very welcoming bunch. If it's your first time, shout out what you're drinking, shout out where you're tuning in from, and we'd be very happy to welcome you. Greg's Whiskey Guide is saying, but to fit the theme tonight, a big hi to Cara. Greg has obviously given Cara Laing a shout out as well, Fred's daughter. Hello, Cara. Maybe you're joining. Maybe you're not able to hang out with your dad tonight, of course, because of the isolation issues that we're having. But if you're joining, Cara, Greg says hello, and so do I. Sid Martin is saying, evening all. Hi, Roy. I got my towel on a front seat early. Sid Martin is a huge Douglas Laing fan. He was super excited as soon as I announced that Fred was going to be joining tonight. He's got a massive collection of Douglas Laing products and was really excited about this particular vPub. Nice to welcome you in, Sid. Good to see you. Skogsmard is here, and he's saying, Aqvavitae, I can't get any independent bottlings here. It's the downside of a government-run spirits monopoly, I guess. All the carrier official bottlings. How do I change this? You rally and raise a community. That's what you do, Skogsmard. You get people petitioning your local MP, whatever it is. And I'm trying to remember where you are, Skogsmard. I'm starting to think, I want to think you're in Scandinavia, but government-run spirits-run monopoly, that sounds a little bit like Canada as well. I think you're in Scandinavia somewhere, my friend, and I apologise for forgetting. Mark Goins is saying, you also have to watch the YouTube app on the phone, tablet, and sign in. Yes, you have to have a Google account and you have to be signed in, so that might prevent you from chatting and participating. It's very easy to do. Most people already have a Google account. Nathan Clark is saying, Roy, when you're talking about independent bottling, are you referring exclusively to single cask releases or blends as well? No, I'm talking about any product that's brought to us from an independent bottler. Obviously, they're becoming more than just people that are bottling single casks now. The vast majority of what SMWS does, for example, is single cask, but occasionally they'll do a blended malt or something a wee bit different. But independent bottlers will quite often vat casks together to bring us a vatted bottling in order to produce a bigger outturn. But they've become whiskey creators these days as well, and they're bringing us branded products that are perhaps sometimes licensed and under license agreement from a distillery, or perhaps they're bringing us I was going to say vatted malts. That's not allowed anymore. It's blended malts, and doing it that way, much like Compass Box, much like Douglas Laing's remarkable malts and things like that. So these products are all provided to us by independent bottlers, and they define themselves from being different from a distiller because they are not, or historically, they were not traditionally distillers. But we can talk about all of that, my friend. And I hope you do find it interesting. The Unsung Heroes here, that looks like a new name. No, Scandinavian monopolies Scandinavian monopolies do carry independent bottlings. Lee J. Brown is saying, sipping on Blair Athol Flora and Fauna, my missus can smell notes. I'm still struggling. My wife smells whiskey better than I do oftentimes. Don't worry about it, Lee J. It's women do seem to have a much more advanced olfactory system, generally speaking, of course. Craig Dollar is here saying, how are you, fella? Salivating for our next village tandoori, big guy. Me too. I think it's going to be some weeks before we have it together, my friend. I think we'll have to order separate carryouts and perhaps have a curry virtually. Just before I bring our guest in, there's a couple of housekeeping things to do as well. I want to talk about Saturday this week is the first virtual whisky festival spearheaded by Tomatin. They're getting together and collaborating with a number of different brands. A fantastic list of collaborating producers and brands are coming together to bring the first virtual lockdown whisky festival, they're calling it, on Saturday. It runs from 2 in the afternoon until 5 p.m. in the afternoon. And they have asked me to host it in their wisdom. Let's see how that goes. We did a dry run earlier today, and we managed to work through what order everything's going to run in, and it looks like it's going to be a really fun thing to do. So if you find yourself at home, of course, on Saturday afternoon between 2 and 5 UK time, please come along and join us there. It's not on my channel. You have to go along and subscribe to the Tomatin channel or the Tomatin Facebook page, and you can pick up the feed there. I really look forward to welcoming you there. If you're interested in what they're going to be pouring and sharing with us, click on the YouTube video on the Tomatin Distillery YouTube channel, and underneath in the description, you're going to find a list of all the brands that are involved and the drams that they're pouring. I would imagine, I hope it's drams that you don't already have. The point of this would be to bring new and exciting expressions to you, but some of the producers may choose to remind us of the value of their core expressions as well. Looking forward to welcoming you there on Saturday. Of course, there will be an extended opening vPub live. Purely in the current climate, I'm putting out extra content. It's been very well received, and thank you all so much for your fantastic support. But I'll also be bringing out a free, completely free and open extended public vPub on Sunday evening as well. Fantastic to see you all. Can I mention quickly to my patrons? Is that okay? I hope everybody doesn't mind. But patrons, at the end of the vPubs now and the end of the pre-recorded videos, you get credits. I share your name with everybody out there. If you don't see your name, you're going to find that that's because you've not selected a tier, and I'll make an assumption from that you want to remain anonymous. If you do want to see your name and it's not appearing, please message me directly and we'll get it sorted out. I got a direct message earlier this week. Somebody was wondering where their name was, and we fixed it really quickly. I'd be happy to display your name and say thank you very, very much for supporting me and this channel. It makes everything possible. I sincerely thank you for it. Okay, David Owen is saying, have you heard of the ultimate single malt Scot whisky company, Independent Bottlers from Holland? I have not, but I can imagine there must be a load of independent bottlers that I'm not familiar with across the world. Simon Ray is saying, Saturday sounds good. Simon, I'm looking forward to welcoming you there. Welsh Toro's in as well. Good to see my friend. Hoyt is saying Aqvavitae will have to leave early. Special no hands drop off to check auto. You still want to open a bottle per month? Mac Edition 5 will be mine. I'm opening more than a bottle per month, and I'm going to open one tonight as well, but I'm going to have our guest tonight choose which one I'm going to open. I don't think I need to introduce to anybody who's joining us tonight. I've had the pleasure of this man's company a couple of times actually, but one specifically very memorable session at Park Circus in Glasgow, where he was pouring drams for us and sharing stories and anecdotes from the industry. And I was inspired to listen to him. I was inspired to hear the depth of his experience in the industry, and I immediately wanted to consider a subject that would be interesting to bring Fred on the vPub, where he could share his stories and his experience with us. And of course, it's just so natural. If I'm going to talk about independent bottlers, why not reach out to one of the most experienced independent bottlers that's out there? I'm going to welcome in the gentleman that is Fred Laing, and say hello and welcome, Fred. Good to see you.
Good evening, Roy. Very nice to say hello to you and to the Barflies, specifically to Sevi, to Sid and to Greg. Nice to catch you all. It will be my pleasure to be with you tonight. And just one little apology, we're only late, not because of what Roy indicated was a problem on the internet generally. It was because he had a problem with the old git sitting over here to get set up on such a StreamYard scenario. So I apologize.
Well, I did have some bandwidth problems as well earlier today and this evening, and StreamYard are putting out regular warnings to talk about YouTube Facebook, and all of these services really creaking under the strain of the extra traffic. Hopefully we're coming through nice and clear to everyone tonight. Audio is clear. We can see Fred looking very dignified and comfortable there, and a dram in hand. Fred, tell me what you have in your glass.
You mentioned Cara earlier on, my daughter,
Yes.
and this was actually her pick for Easter bottling 2020. 155 bottles of a 22-year-old Invergordon grain Scotch whisky, which we have been plugging away for the last 10, 12 years. And you can see there's quite a lot of traction now on grains generally. I particularly like them because I've got a sweet tooth and there's always a bit of vanilla and toffee coming through. So this is bottled at 48.9. Cara's Choice, it's our Easter bottling.
Is it a Clondeni then? You often put your grain in.
You're quite right, although you're a little bit behind the loop because Clondeni was how we introduced the grains. This is actually Old Particular, single cask of Invergordon, although with our grains under the Old Particular brand, we actually sometimes have two casks thrown in together, just as a matter of interest. The malts are always single casks.
Understand.
I'm going to leave the floor to you.
No, it's very much your floor tonight, Fred. I mean, I could have fielded a discussion on independent bottlings myself, but everybody would have had to just listen to the best of my knowledge, how I understood it to be. And I thought it would be much more interesting just to have a fairly open discussion to talk about the mechanics and dynamics of independent bottlers, how they've come to be, and where we are in the modern landscape, and how many of them are getting now into distilling and everything. So we can just meander down that road if you're comfortable with it. But let me open with the obvious question. If we describe a scenario, or if we use a kind of analogy of being in a supermarket aisle and seeing a bottle of Coca-Cola on the shelf, and then immediately next to it, there's another bottle of Coca-Cola, but it's not branded Coca-Cola. It simply has a white label on it that says Coca-Cola bottled by X. Now, it's not an apples for apples comparison, of course, but that's sometimes what we're faced with when we see an independent bottling. So as a concept, to a lot of people that are new to whiskey, let's say, or new to the concept of independent bottlers, that can be maybe not confusing, but it can be bewildering as to why it exists. So let's start with that. Let's ask you, Fred, in the world of distilling, how could independent bottlers come to be? How did they come about in the first place?
I always doff my cap and give great credibility to Gordon MacPhail, who I regard as the grandpappies of this single cask business. You've got to remember, our own company is just over 70 years old, and we come from a blending and bottling background. So as our company built up through the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and into the 90s, my father laid down a lot of stock with different distillers across the country. That built up in age, such that in the late 1970s, right through to the mid 1990s, a lot of our sales were being made in the Far East, in and around the Pacific Rim. A lot of the sales had also been made into travel retail duty-free shops, and then spun out into the domestic markets. And for these markets to work in the Far East, you needed outright quality and a perception of it. So we were bottling 25 and 30-year-old blended Scotch whiskies into King of Scots or one of our old ceramic branded names, so in ceramic decanters or crystal decanters. These were great days until the tiger economies around the Far East had their financial problems. At that stage, sales dropped away for us, and in 1999 they dropped away so much that we had to make the call to really acknowledge it was an existentialist decision. If that market had fallen away, we had great stocks of old whiskey stocks designed for blending.
Yes.
We decided we had to reinvent ourselves. And so in 1999 into the year 2000, we developed our first single cask, single malt Scotch whisky in the shape of the old malt cask, which we sold 7 years ago, essentially to my brother's company. And the single cask category, therefore, for us was an existentialist move in 2000. So much lack of knowledge did we show in this category that, for example, we originally released that single cask in green glass because we did not know just how much flock and obscuration would be shown through white flint glass. The most stupid thing we probably did was to not realize that old Port Ellens, old Macallans, old Lafroigs, old Ardbegs that we had in stock aplenty for our blend.
Of course. Yeah.
Were going to be as attractive as the marketplace had started to develop into. So if I knew then the price I could achieve today for these old Port Ellens and Ardbegs, Macallans and Lafroigs, we would have held back the sales. However, we let the sales go through because we needed to turn stock into cash. That being so, they probably did help to establish Douglas Laing to be seen as an independent bottler, something I did not actually fully understand the description of, but it took us away from being blenders and bottlers. So that's how we found ourselves in it. It was a force majeure that moved us into this category.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when you talk about Gordon and MacPhail and you talk about the stocks that they were building up for the various reasons, the stocks that you were building up over time, all this comes from an industry that has been used to historically selling casks and trading casks for blending. And that was blending for big brands, or it was perhaps even blending way back in the 19th century. It would have been blended at grocer level, right? It would have been blended at store level. So that we come from a history of cask trading, the Scotch whisky industry, right?
Yes, indeed.
I'm just, Welsh Toro has mentioned a comment there to say, Aqvavitae, I love independent bottlers and what they bring to the community. They completely break up the uniformity of the industry and add a unique personality. Welsh, I have to agree that that's a good point. It just, when we talk about the current boom that we're enjoying in single malts, it's boom time right now, but it's a different boom time from the boom time that we enjoyed when it was blends, post-war blends. This is all about variation and variety and flavour. It's tasting and not drinking. So the more variation that we can have, the better, even down to the point that we'll take a distillery and have lots and lots. The more variation we can get from our favourite distilleries, the better. So I agree with you completely, Welsh. Would you agree with Welsh Toro?
Absolutely. Absolutely bang on. And the important word there is uniformity and conformity. Obviously, the distillers, when they release their regular 12, 15 or 21-year-old single malt from that preferred distillery, they want enough uniformity from bottling to bottling such that the volatile impurities, I would call them, of single casks are evened out and ironed out. From an independent bottler's point of view, we're looking for those variations on a theme. We specifically acknowledge that every cask is different. Every cask imparts its own DNA and fingerprinting onto that whisky. Now, for us, that's great. For Joe Public, who may not know his malts, and it takes me back to that point you were making, Roy, namely that how do you acknowledge a Linkwood distillery bottling against a Linkwood Douglas Laing bottling side by side on a Cab East or specialist retailer shelf until it's hand sold to the potential purchaser. You're going to find it difficult because as likely as not, the single cask bottling is going to be more expensive. It's going to be under a brand name that is not immediately recognized. And so we tend not to see these single cask bottlings in a supermarket scenario.
Sure.
You see them in a specialist outlet where the owner, manager can talk a potential purchaser through and indicate to them just what special nuances the single cask brings, as opposed to the delights of the regularity and uniformity from the distillery itself.
And I think that is one of the, I'll just mention Jason Whiskey Wise, my friend down in London, he's saying Aqvavitae, it's massive thanks to independent bottlers that we've so much older single casks around. Otherwise, all the companies would have used them in blends. Thank you, independent bottlers. I would also like to say thank you to Arnie Tiger, who's just joined the Aqvavitae Barflies. All the Aqvavitae Barflies allows you, Arnie, welcome on board. It's $1.99 a month, and it gives you access to all those lovely Glencairn emojis and things that you'll see floating around, the Barfly emojis, all the custom emojis that you can only use on this channel, and of course it supports the channel as well. But you're mentioning there, Fred, exactly that and the specialist retailer only needs to sell the concept that one time. Once he's got his point across of what distinguishes the official bottling, where they are striving for consistency, as you absolutely point out, versus you know, a single cask perhaps, or a small vatting from an independent bottler, it's quite a different experience.
For sure. I don't know that I can add much to that at this point. I suppose it thereafter depends and takes the potential customer through to a point where if he knows that the previous bottling that he had a chance to buy from his preferred independent bottler works for him, it gives him that confidence to go back and try others. From our point of view, Cara, myself, Chris, my son-in-law, the team generally in Douglas Laing know that our next meal depends on releasing what we hope is a great quality in a cask. You know, we've got casks there that once we've done a selection of them for provenance, for old particular or extra old particular, we make a call. It used to be largely my decision. Now it's spread through the family. We make a call as to whether that cask is good enough to go into a single cask bottling. The nice thing is that if it's not up to our preferred quality, then we can use it in our remarkable regional malts that you referred to earlier. So some of these casks can be a little bit flat, even at 12 or 13 years of age.
Yeah.
If that's the case, although our Big Pete, for example, from Isla, does not run into the teens except for special bottlings, if one of our Isla casks is a little bit flatter than we would want to release it as a single cask, we'll pop it into Big Pete. And that will apply similarly, without using any distillery names, from our Highland stock, it will go into Timorous Beastie. From our Speyside stock, it will go into Scallywag. So we've got a position.
Talking about Scallywag and Timorous Beastie, Fred, I've just finished my dram. I was sipping here a Tom and 12 14-year-old from Angus Dundee there. That was a kind of light and delicate, but still very well presented, 46% non-chill filtered. A nice way to start it. But I'm going to ask Fred, Sevi, who you mentioned earlier, has evangelized to me about one of the bottles I'm holding in my hand. He evangelized about the other one, but I already knew about it. I'm going to open one of these tonight, and I'm going to share it with you, Fred. I'm going to open either this is one of yours. This is it's a Timorous Beastie 18.
Yes.
I hear from Sevi that it's a peach, and also another one of his favourites as well is the Scallywag. This is the 13, which was your sherry cask edition, I believe, if I remember well. I'm just looking at the label here. The 13-year-old Scallywag.
Yeah. I've got to say, I go through one of these probably every 8 weeks. I don't drink a lot, but that is one of my favourites just to mull over. It's incredibly sherry in its style. There's loads of spice going on in it. Incredibly sweet. It's treacle. There's treacle. There's spices. But in actual fact,
so are you telling me between these two I should be opening the Scallywag?
No, I think just for a change you should open the Timorous Beastie, because I think as a Highland malt, I have to say that on their own, the Highland malts generally, for me personally, are delightful, but they're kid brother to the Space Ciders. What I found when I started putting together the recipe, which was to all intents and purposes a touch and feel exercise, when we're putting the recipe together for Timorous Beastie in its regular capacity, bizarrely, absolutely bizarrely, the conjunction and the vatting of these Highlanders, which are all quite soft and not big hitters on their own, gave an incredible liqueur style, incredibly sweet and honeyed. It blew my socks away. And I think this one, in terms of the older Timorous Beastie, same. I was also quite pleased when I saw the colour on screen there just now. You know, Douglas Laing will never add colour to either our vatted malts or our single malts. We'll add blended Scotch. But
and I noticed this one is bottled at 46.8% as well.
Yes, indeed.
So we've talked then about the idea that you're going to have something that's very much pointing much more to somebody that's after a more artisanal product. They're after something a bit more specialist, a connoisseur, a geek, an enthusiast, whatever you want, the one that finds themselves at a specialist retailer, versus an official bottling. And I guess distillery releases can either be the core range where they're trying to maintain that consistency over their 10, 12, 15, 18, whatever it may be, range, but they'll also have a smattering of limited releases and things as well. So we can clearly see that what we're doing here is developing products for very different markets.
Yes.
Very different palates, very different. A lot of the single casks that you're putting out there, Fred, would be often at cask strength. And that high ABV means that you can only really preach to somebody who's already been enjoying their whiskey for some time, because that barrier to enjoyment is just a little high at cask strength sometimes. So you're the majority of your market then is to the enthusiast or the connoisseur end of the market, and certainly your volumes can only cater to that as well if we're dealing in single casks most of the time. Yes,
Absolutely.
but then you pick up on products like this, and obviously Scallywag. Now we're not talking mass volume here. We're still talking in relative terms lower outturns, but much bigger outturns than single cask stuff. When did those come about, and what was the necessity? Was that an existential thing there? Was that just developing the brand? What made you because this takes you from somebody who's just taking a cask and putting it into a bottle to what you've been talking about there about the Timorous Beastie, that blend coming together to be greater than the sum of its parts. So what you've become there, you're not an independent bottler, you're a whiskey maker at that stage.
We would regard ourselves as always having been blenders. You know, my father was a blender. My first job at White & Mackay was working underneath Major Hartley White of that company.
Right.
My job, whilst it was of an apprenticeship nature, going into different operations within White Horse Distillers, the area I loved most was the blending room with a charming gentleman, Gardner Ferrier, who was the blender for White Horse. He taught me a lot, just talking casually to him and being in and around him in his blending room. When I joined my father, he had his own way of blending. It certainly wasn't technical. It was very much the way I put it together, Fred, he would say to me, I like it and I hope it sells. And that is still very much our style and attitude. But in terms of what we discovered when we started to develop the remarkable regional malts from Big Pete onwards through the range, and I don't think there's probably another company in the Scotch whisky industry who could release vatted malts, and we should talk about the word vatted later, Roy.
Okay, I sense you want to have a rant.
A wee one. But to be able to release vatted malts from Campbelltown, the Lowlands, the Highlands, Speyside, the islands, and Isla itself, it is pretty rare. So having opened up a lot of doors to us where we believe the vatting is an archetypal indication of what to expect from that region, which is what our remarkable regional malts do. Yes, there's a simple man of commerce that functions within me and the rest of the team, and we do wish to sell more. And the first instance of this was 9 years ago, when after we released Big Pete for the first time, I thought it would be rather nice to have a Big Pete Christmas special at cask strength.
Yes.
And we are more than we anticipated.
Yes.
So we saw the traction that specials could have. And so sometimes it's a cask strength aspect. Sometimes we'll pull in stocks of different ages, and we'll just experiment. And if we like them, we will put them out. Now, it's still cottage industry. The big players in our industry would regard the numbers we put out of, say, the Timorous Beastie or the Scallywag 13-year-old sherry matured. We're only talking 5,000 or 6,000 bottles at any one time. That's tiny. That's micro within the industry, when they're quite often talking about 6,000 cases being bottled in any one vatting. So we can still do it, and it offers that halo to the brand. It keeps an interest in the brand. And of course, there's a strong marketing ethic. For me, it's from the gut, but from my daughter, Cara, it's university trained, and there is a marketing sense and strength that I hope we bring to the equation that makes sense. And as I say, creates a certain halo effect on the brand itself.
Yes, interesting, very interesting. There's just a quick question come in from Jim Whiskey Novice, but in the chat I also notice it's difficult to. We've got a couple of admins helping me to run tonight, but I noticed that Whiskey Shared is asking and hoping that I pick something up. And Richard Hall is hoping that I'll pick something up as well. So guys, just let me know what that may be, if there's anything that I need to be paying attention to. We've got a question here from Jim over Northern Ireland saying, Aqvavitae, any chance you could ask if we'll ever see a rock oyster? Haha, well, I can answer this. If we'll ever see a rock oyster cask strength batch 3, you may see a rock island. Let's hand that over to Fred.
Yeah, get your act together, young man, because we changed our name from Rock Oyster to Rock Island.
Yes.
Probably 18 months, 2 years ago. We saw
it's the same product, yes.
It's the exact same blended malt in the bottle, but we did feel it was appropriate to change the brand. Something I don't think any of the big players in the industry would do. I think you've seen it with other brands in washing up liquids and ladies' toiletries. But we found that the oyster was a little bit like Marmite. You either loved it or loathed it on a global basis. And so slowly we integrated, we phased out the Rock Oyster stock and phased in the Rock Island stock. But yes, I'm sure we will introduce another Rock Island cask strength. You've got to be careful with it. It's high strength and it'll put hairs in your chest, so be very careful.
If you've seen Jim, he's hairs. He's not a stranger to hair. Let's say it that way. He's got a magnificent beard going on. I don't think he's worried about that, and I'm sure he would love to get his hands on. Obviously, if you say it's a Marmite product, clearly Jim's fallen on the side of the fan and he's enjoying it. An interesting question there for you, Fred, as well, from Toby Whiskey Shared. He's asking, you mentioned Gordon McPhail earlier as well. So does Douglas Laing buy new make or ready barreled whiskey or both? So I think what he's saying is, do you get your own casks perhaps filled under license? Does that happen still, or?
It's not under license. You know, one of the very nice early stories of my father, when he bought out the small group of Americans who owned the King of Scots brand, for whom he was working on a post-World War II basis, they said, look, we've run out of stock, Fred. You can buy the company for a peppercorn price of £1. So The company he was less interested in. The brand, the King of Scots, which is our prime blended Scotch whisky, was always of interest for him. So he bought the blended name itself and 3 casks of actual liquid. At that stage, he had to jump in a car and drive around as many different distilleries around Scotland to try and source not only mature stock, but the facility to start a filling program. So from 1948, 49, 50, 51 and onwards, but in a never growing selection of distilleries around Scotland.
Because this was the post-war boom kicking off at that time.
It was the post-war boom, but he couldn't really take advantage of it because he didn't have so much stock. So
yes.
He actually had to not only buy the mature stock in those days, but start a filling program. So that set of filling programs that my father started has been added to over the interim 70 years. It's still the case. There was a new distillery added onto our filling program last year and 2 in 2018. So we still continue to add filling programs. Now, that's not to say that we will not be approached at different times by the distillers who know largely what stock of theirs we have on our books. That being so, they'll dangle some, perhaps some younger stock of that same distillery in order to access some of the older stock. We've got to take a call on it. We want to maintain good relations with that distillery, but we may know that we can make some very good, interesting business with that old stock. Sometimes the distillery will say to us, as happened last about 5 years ago, but it's happened at different stages through our history. They'll say, look, Messrs. Laing, with apologies, we're going to have to stop filling for you because we need the stock ourselves. Our sales of our own malt are going so fast. So not only are we asking you to stop filling, and we'll phase you out over a 3-year window, which is a very sporting attitude that they take, quite protective attitude. Then over these 3 years to seek out other distilleries where we can source a malt as close to what we're looking for. So there are doors opening, there are doors closing, but
yes,
we're still bottling today stocks of whiskey that my father filled back in the late 1960s and 70s. I mean, it's a very nice emotional connection for me, that.
Well, that's a nice segue, because Luna Aaron over in Germany has asked Aqvavitae, would you mind asking Fred, what is the major difference between today and when he took over the business? That's a very, very, we could go, that could be quite a deep question, because we're talking about a contrast there from when you took over, Fred, to the situation you find yourself in now. It's going to be quite an interesting one.
Well, remember that when I worked with my father, we would travel around South America, the States and Europe. We would know our importers on a very personal basis. Through the 1980s and 90s, the world changed. The world became much more focused on margins in terms of the Scotch whisky industry. And prior to that, it was a handshake and it was eye contact, and the business was very personal. Now, when we got into the 2000 the year 2000, the personal side of the business became quite different again. But it was not with the importers and distributors to the same degree. There was a demand to go out and meet the public. So this single cask category took us back to a very personal contact with our customers, but the customers were absolutely grassroots as opposed to the importers. Now, beyond that, working with my father, I had my run-ins with him. But when he died, my brother and I, with whom we worked, together at that stage, formed a different team, a different style altogether. And when we went our two separate ways 13 years later in 2000, the dynamic changed massively, because quite expressly, I could bring a different dimension to the equation, specifically with the addition of Cara and Chris, a younger, well-proven, historic background in the whisky trade. Chris had been sales manager for Suntory Europe. Cara had been brand manager for Jura and then Bowmore. So they brought a lot more expertise than I could ever bring myself. I reckon I've got a good gut feel for the industry, but they bring expertise. And I think my father would be very proud to see the way the company is developing. I don't think it has yet developed. It's on a roll. It is developing. And he would not recognize many aspects of it. But I think he would be particularly proud to see my daughter, his granddaughter, who he knew for 2 or 3 years of his life before he passed away. So yeah, he would be very proud.
Yes, and it's interesting because there are some parallels there with the changes over the 20 or so years, because I'm finding now that that we are seeing a younger demographic being interested in whiskey. It is broadening in its appeal. I know there's a lot of effort being done by the industry. There needs to be a lot more, I believe, to bring education, to bring understanding of the product. And I wonder, I mean, it's an expensive thing. We have to remember that always, that one of the barriers is the cost, of course. But not all whiskies, not all malts are expensive. And I'm seeing that, certainly from my experience, I'm seeing a younger demographic coming in as well. So that's interesting that you talk about Cara and Chris at the helm, because they'll be preaching to a slightly different audience, perhaps, oftentimes.
Yeah, and I think, without blowing our own trumpet too much, 10 years ago when we introduced Big Pete onto an unsuspecting malt drinking public, the reality was that many of our old and staid importers who were my age would not wish to touch the brand. They couldn't understand the aspect of Big Pete with his cartoon face on a bottle. They would fail to appreciate that there was a rather serious Islay malt within it. And we actually had to send a lot of our cases out free of charge in those early days. And they were knocked out because there was a younger demographic, and they saw Big Pete and said, well, that's not your normal Scotch whisky style. Now, there's a lot of racy, fun type labels out there nowadays.
Yes.
There were not. And so I think that's one of the reasons Big Pete has quite a young following. I think I've told you before that there's a lot of young guys out there ask us for artwork of Big Pete's face so that they can apply it to their arms or their legs, and
yes,
and they can contort their arm muscle so that his
grimace changes.
Turns into a smile, absolutely. So, and it's one of the aspects that we like to think we bring to Douglas Laing Company. We have a lot of fun, and albeit it's a serious business, the Scotch whisky business.
Yes, but I mean, I think what you're talking about there is softly challenging traditional mindset and trying to gently lead them in a direction to show them that these concepts, these ideas are actually very positive things for the industry in general. And we can never underestimate the power of branding. What it does there to bring a sense of something that people can connect with and understand, come to rely on and enjoy and find some comfort in as well. Venet No Nonsense Whiskey is saying, Aqvavitae question for Fred. That's a good one. After all the bottles he's been involved in, is there a unicorn dram that he's just not been able to get? Is there something just a wee bit out of reach, Fred? Malt mill.
Nice question, an interesting question. I think my best dram is upstairs in my loft still. I don't think I'm going to get any better than some bottles I have from a 24-year-old Port Helen that was bottled in, I can't remember, 2003, 2004.
And back then it would have been under £100 as well.
Stupidly so, yes.
Hindsight has 20/20 vision, of course.
Somebody got the pricing wrong. but because I've never had the requirement to buy a bottle of whisky from any other source other than the company, and we do have a shop for directors and staff in the company. There was maybe a time when it was a director's perk that he did not need to pay for the particular bottle, but now we pay for the bottles. But some old Port Ellen upstairs take me right back to my school days, to a point when my father would come home from a lunch because he'd had a successful day. He would have been rumbustiously drunk and would come into my bedroom, probably waken me. I would be 15 or 16 years of age at the time. And he'd ask me about school, he'd ask me about rugby, he'd ask me why I had a bruise on my eye. But he would breathe this particular set of fumes over me, which were unrecognizable until I was up in, bizarrely, what I call enemy territory. I was up in Elgin, which should have been Gordon and MacPhail's back door.
Yes.
Doing a whisky tasting to a busload of French whisky aficionados. And the last whisky was a 24-year-old Port Ellen. Now, it was at the end of a long, probably 7 or 8, 9 whiskies prior to that evening. And as I sniffed Port Ellen, which had been poured earlier on in the evening, I just caught my father's breath on it. And the Frenchman thought this was very strange, because Monsieur Fred started to cry, and tears ran down my cheek, because this had and it still does it to me, still chokes me. This had immediately taken me back to my father's breath. Now, naturally, I recovered the moment all right, but I realised that not just commercially was Port Ellen therefore probably my favourite malt, but in terms of emotion and heartfelt appreciation, Port Ellen is probably my desert island dram, which I think is what is being asked there. There may be other stuff out there which I don't know about. I also have one of these Rolling Stones 50th decanters that Suntory put out.
Yes.
Now it is very expensive. And because I'm an old rock and roller, one day I might open it. Maybe the day Jagger dies, I will have to open it and drink the contents of it to commiserate with him. But
well, there you go, Vin. The one that Fred's trying to get a hold of is another cask of that magical 24-year-old Port Ellen. And Fred, I have to say, it's wonderful to hear you share that story. I can't tell you the amount of times that I've stared inside a glass of whiskey and asked myself what just happened. And the emotion is very, very visceral, and it's very real. And if it catches a nostalgic moment or a memory like that, I've warned the toughest of my friends that whiskey will bring tears if you allow it.
Look, and it's not a case of allowing. Just enjoy the moment. It's a moment, and it's no big deal that men should cry. When we released Scallywag, the week after Cara departed on her honeymoon, wee Binks, the little dog who appears with one tooth on Scallywag, died. Cara didn't know it. She was on her honeymoon, but I had to be out in Sweden to do an introductory tasting, amongst which Scallywag was brought number 3 into the selection.
Wow.
And as I spoke to a nice audience, a mixture of ladies and gentlemen, I said to them that this is Scallywag and that's my wee dog. I said, no, that was my wee dog, and it will still do it to me. So I shouldn't go there. But the ladies, but in particular the Swedish ladies, were very kind to me. They came and consoled me. But just as you say, the power of that emotion attached to a label, a memory, a taste, it's a wonderful thing.
It is. It is. And I think I'll never cease to be amazed by how you don't plan these things. You're at a tasting, you're just, sometimes you're there, you're not looking for it, and it just hits you. And my friend Scott Monroe's probably in the chat tonight. Scott was also with me when we enjoyed your company at the end of last year, Fred, along with Terry and Craig Severin. He was with me there, but him and I, we've just, he's got this thing. It's very similar to what I say regularly. It's just, we look at this glass and we say, whiskey, it's just amazing. It's just, and sometimes you just lose any means of articulating what you're feeling. You just have to be quiet with it and just let it have that, just let that emotion wash over you. It's very, very interesting for you to share that story. I'll take you in a slightly different direction now, thanks to Donald Rance, and he's got a question for you, Fred. He said, are there plans to do any indie bottlings of different world whiskies, American, Irish, Japanese, etc.? You're very Scotch focused right now.
Yeah, I think we will stay that way. Look, we've got the odd social contact with Irish friends. We don't know many of the Japanese distillers. Watashi wa sukoshi no hongo wa wakarimasu. So I speak a little Japanese, and I should try and further doors. But you know, and probably we could do it and should do it with some of the Americans. It has been discussed over the years, and it's been discounted. I don't know how we would brand it. Old Particular and Extra Old Particular are seen, I think, as Scotch brands. I don't see us changing it. If Cara is looking in, she'll say, no, we're going to do it one day. I don't see it personally myself.
I understand. And to be honest with you, given the plethora of variation that actually is existing within Scotch right now, it's even difficult for me as an enthusiast to keep up to date with world whiskey events and developments. It's booming. Yes. It's a global boom that we're experiencing right now, and it can be very tough to keep up to date with it as well.
One thing we don't want to be is a Me Too operation. We always like to be in the van of anything that we're developing. So I think we've got to know our limitations, Roy.
I have to say, you've hit the nail on the head when you talked about honey with this Timorous Beastie. It's very like an aromatic honey. Yes. There's a wonderful dryness there as well. I think I've actually potentially missed a dram. It looks like somebody has potentially bought me a dram while you were talking there, and I may have been so gripped that I've missed it. I hope that that's not the case.
There's one here asking me to what degree is consistency important in our regional malt range, as they only have so much access to the different stocks from different distilleries. But of course, as and when, if I'm allowed to take over that question, Roy.
That's why it's there, Fred. It's there for you. Yeah. That's for Menno in Belgium. Menno's asked that question.
In terms of consistency, the longer we go on and the further we get into those extra filling programs and larger filling programs, not just in terms of width of distilleries, but the amount we're buying from the distilleries as fillings, the more consistency we will get. There are times when we can maybe make an exchange for some of our older stock for other whiskies if we're short on them.
Yes.
But you know, with Big Pete in particular, we are very relaxed, and in actual fact, I think the consistency will get better as our stocks get bigger. It allows us to spread the load into litre bottles for duty free, and there were restrictions on us. We did not ever wish to release stock that was not archetypal of that particular brand, and so these have been restrictions on Scallywag and on Big Pete. The more we fill, the more consistency we get, and so I'm very much relaxed in that area.
Can I be cheeky, Fred? I'm going to ask you something with my tongue planted firmly in my cheek, and I hope that you take it in the spirit that it's intended. I do recycled reviews, and one time I reviewed Big Pete, and I'm always struck. I think even now it's still released with Port Ellen mentioned on the label. How much Port Ellen do you actually share with us in Big Pete?
Well, it's not as much as we first used to put in, because our stock holding is quite distinctly reduced now. What I would say, and it goes back to one of the earlier points I made, there are understandably casks of our Port Ellen reaching 40 years of age now. We've just released a very nice cask. You've got to work a little bit harder on it than I did have to work on the 24-year-old Port Ellen to squeeze out all the flavours. But through the different ages of Port Ellen that we were seeking to release, we had to acknowledge that as they got into their early 30s and mid 30s, they were going a bit flat. Now that was understandable. Most Islay whiskies, the older they are, in my opinion, the more mainland they become in style.
Yes.
So some of these casks, as I say, that are flatter than I would want to release within a single cask bottling have been reserved, and the appropriate stock is extracted. I will only say appropriate stock, and I'm not going to give you the number of bottles, but they are plural bottles, and they're not miniature bottles that are removed to be put into each vatting, Roy. And I can look you in the eye and say that in all veracity.
There must be a ceremony that goes along with that. That must be like the baptism of Big Pete to finally to give him his little christening of Port Ellen into the vatting. Fantastic.
I must say, it's a very nice emotional name to have on board a label and to show on the front of a label, which in itself was quite unusual. I don't believe there were many or any blends, whether they were blended scotches or vatted malts, showing 10 years ago. The contents carry, for example, Ardbeg, Bowmore, Kailila, and Port Ellen. So that was quite novel, and we continued that on back labels at different stages on the newer releases of RRMs.
Interesting. Fantastic. Thanks so much. The Whiskey Jury, that looks like a new name, my friend. It's nice to welcome you in. He says, can you please ask the difference between, I think I know the answer to this as well, between buying empty sherry casks today compared to the 80s? I think
it's fairly substantially different in terms of pricing. Back then you were probably talking £100. Now you're talking £600. The one thing in terms of our wood is that we today do not have quite the same control of our wood that my father had. My father went to the coopers, the cooperages, and select the casks that he wanted to put into his filling program, and a lorry load or 2 lorry loads would be delivered to that distillery on behalf of Douglas Laing to fill into our casks. The reality today is that as the distillers get bigger and bigger, they are less able to manage lorry loads from Douglas Laing Company of selected casks. So we are largely integrated into the distiller's wood program. There are examples, probably about 3 of them, where we recycle Islay casks into our filling program on Islay. There are any of our sherry casks that come out of a filling that has gone into a single cask bottling goes straight into our stock of Speyside scallywag fillings. But the essence now is that we depend a lot on the distillers. We pay a premium to the distillers to give us the right wood, if it is, for example, sherry, and we expect to pay a premium, but we do not currently, although we have doors open and at different stages we bring in sherry casks for finishing from some of the smaller bodegas in Jerez de la Frontera, but we're largely dependent on the major distillers themselves for that wood policy.
Yes, yes. And I've heard that some distilleries now, for the most precious of sherry casks, easily pay in excess of £1,000 to get the best quality and things, obviously depending on European versus American oak, depending on the provenance of the cask and things. But yeah, I think the easiest answer to your question, I forget who asked it now, the whiskey jury, would be price. That's the easiest way to answer that, is the cost of the things. Ben Demon Hunter is saying, he's talking to Richard Agnew's highlighted me, saying, you're kind of new to Whiskey Tube community. You're in for a real treat. Excellent people. Most of them are second to none caliber people. Absolutely, Ben Demon Hunter. Thank you for welcoming in Richard Agnew, and thank you for reassuring them that the community is second to none. I absolutely second that. It's a privilege to be part of this community. You're all amazing folk. Graham Fraser is saying, for Fred, is it becoming more difficult to source casks for independent bottlings given the increasing demand for distillers' own bottlings?
We were never dependent on it. We have really depended on the filling program put down by my father. Now, there have been exceptions. In the old days, back in 1999, 2000, when I started to look at the prospect of running a single cask program, we ran the first 4 experimental bottlings with a Talisker, a Dalwhinnie, I can't remember the other 2 offhand, and I took the bottles over to show Diageo, and back in those days they were not Diageo. I think they were not even UDV. Maybe they were United Distillers back then.
DCL?
I have a DCL background because of my White Horse. I cannot remember when the move was from DCL to United Distillers. I took the casks or the bottles over to a Mr. Turnbull Hutton, who ran the stock control for that company back then. Wonderful gentleman, much revered, much feared, a bruiser of a man who swore like a trooper, fascinating to talk to, and he cussed me and was very rude to me in terms of what I had presented on his table. And he said, don't you ever use any of our classic malts in your bottling, and don't ever put a pack out like that again, because whoever designed it, and I know who designed it because I've got my first drawings on it, put some of our own designers to shame. Now, within that equation, he said, but I've got some spare barrels, and if you want, I'll do an exchange with you. So we exchanged stock back in those days with what is now Diageo. But nowadays, we do still depend on our filling program coming through. The brokers will occasionally have casks, but there are not so many brokers in operation now. They're almost as much as anything else looking for an exchange of stock. So we are now pretty self-dependent, and you can see that in terms of the average age that we sell within Old Particular. It's probably come down 10 years. 10 years for every decade that we have run it. So in the last 20 years, our average age has probably dropped about 20 years. And it's only specific old casks beyond 21, 25, 30 years of age that we put into our extra old particular.
Yes.
And that's where the grains become quite attractive for us, because coming from a blending background, when we jumped into the single cask operation, the malts were getting used up too fast, but the grain stock was left behind. And of course, the nice thing about the grain whiskies is that as they concentrate down over a 20, 30-year window and end up at 45 or 50 years of age, at which age we're releasing a lot of our grains now.
Sure.
That absolute concentration of toffee and vanilla and crushed sugar is just absolutely there.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, I think when you speak about the ages that you're speaking about, 20, 25, 30, 40 years and beyond, grains are still expensive, but they're relatively affordable in comparison to their malt counterparts as well. And I think when you talk about the general age profile of your bottlings coming down, thanks for being so candid. I mean, we can all see that, but we have to understand that it's a function of the nature of the industry. But that's not just Douglas Laing. That's right across the board. That's right across all independent bottlers. And I mean, I'm sure that so many of you wish that you still had some of the stocks that you had back in the early 2000s, in the late 90s, for exactly the reasons that you've already touched upon. Like we say, it's funny to look back on these days and with hindsight, right? It's just fascinating.
Yeah. Yes.
Fraser Bell is saying, can you ask Fred to now? Oh, I've just lost you, Fraser. I'll try and catch you quickly. Fraser Bell saying, can you ask Fred to give an example of where one of his single cask releases reveals a markedly different character in the distillery? This is an interesting question. So he's talking about comparison to an official bottling range. Something that you bottle that is really quite different from what you would expect from the distillery. I can think of one straight away. Could I suggest Bamore?
Yes. My only problem is that I don't believe I have tasted a Bowmore distillery bottling. So I can only compare our Bowmores with previous Bowmores that we have released, and I can spot the difference in them, whether there's a fresh fruitiness or a bit of the so-called smoke that Bowmore was marketed as having. So I've never been involved in a vertical tasting of any of our single casks up against distillery bottlings of the same age. So I'm not really the one to ask, I'm afraid.
You'd already mentioned that obviously because you're surrounded by so much of your own whiskey, unless you're gifted something, I guess it's very, very difficult for you to actually taste whiskey from various people. And you're not tasting the standard official bottlings from the likes of Bowmore right now. So I completely understand that, Fred. I do.
But one particular bottling from way back, from probably 2004, was an incredible 28, 30-year-old Brora, which was just so incredibly peated. Now, I was told that Brora, as a rule, is not incredibly peated. And when I inquired of one of the experts within United Distillers, or DCL, if that was their name, he said that the guy in charge of the maltings, which in those days would not have been computer controlled, probably fell asleep and picked up some of the Port Ellen or the Talisker maltings in what should have been a Brora maltings. And that you can probably tell me, Roy, if Brora was perceived as a particularly peated malt, or if that we understand that it was
the way I understand it has always been that Brora was almost going to be like a plan B if Diageo, or at the time it would have been DCL, I guess, if they had any kind of problems with Caol Ila or Lagavulin, they could rely on a plan B from somewhere, and Brora was brought back to life. When it was first brought back to life, it was brought back to life to produce not heavily peated, but let's say significantly peated malt. But then over the years, throughout the 70s and into the early 80s, batches of Brora, in a very general way, tended to have less and less peat. If we have Brora from the late 70s and early 80s, it tends to be just a puff of smoke that you can detect there. But if it's earlier than that, back to the early 70s, mid 70s, we can enjoy some nice thicker smoke. But I've not had many Broras. I could probably count on my hands how many times I've tried Broras. It's a wonderful experience to be able to enjoy. But none of them have been extremely peaty, absolutely. But of course, I'm trying Broras at an age where the peat would have subdued significantly now.
Yes.
Yeah. Skogsmard has asked this question a couple of times. I'd like to ask it. It says, do you ever, it's an interesting one as well, did you ever have a cask turn out fantastic that you wish you could recreate, but just have not been able to? What was it? Well, I'm going to suggest your Port Ellen 24 is one of them.
Yes. And what I probably have to acknowledge is that even back then in 2003 or 4, when it was bottled, I didn't appreciate just how much it would soften over the ensuing years. You certainly cannot recreate a single cask. You hope that you might be lucky enough to come across another one. Often when you go looking for it, you're disappointed. And so you used a word earlier on yesterday, Roy, serendipity. And it's one of these serendipitous moments that you depend on, and that makes the single cask category very attractive for us. When I'm writing my tasting notes, I will not only do the tasting notes, but drop a note on at the end of it that this is exceptional. This is really rather special for an 8-year-old Talisker or whatever it might be. And when I get to the point of pricing it, I notice that the quality is specifically good, and I sorry to say it to you, but I do ease the price up if the cask, if another distillery of a similar age is being bottled and tasted 6-8 months later, and it's good but not as good as that one, I'll say nice, but I'll acknowledge it, and the price might soften. There are times when we soften our prices.
No, I think that's it's very refreshing to hear you being that candid. I mean, I think we've often, I mean, it's just standard dynamics. Okay, we know that something is particularly good. We know that it's going to be in high demand, and you know that it's more precious to you. But it's also nice that you then don't use that to set a precedent for future bottlings, where you might have to take the view that this isn't what the previous one was, and the price should reflect that as well. And of course, people are buying from you on the understanding that you are dealing in single casks and they can't rely on consistency. Chris Moore's asked an interesting question, but I'm going to delay it a little bit because I'm going to take you to a point and I'm going to ask you some questions a little bit down the road that refers to Chris. He's asking about Strathearn. So we're going to get to that in a little bit when we talk about the future for independent bottlers. Somebody else asked what the future was going to be for you, Fred, over the next 5 years. But I also want to ask, I've got a gentleman in the chat tonight called Dave Cummins. Let me tell you a little bit about Dave. I happen to know that he's 50 years old this year, same age as me. And Dave lives in the States. But what was, we can't do it now. We were originally planning to go to Glengoyne together, Dave and I was going to take him to Glengoyne for his first ever taste of Scotch whisky, but also his first ever taste of alcohol in his life. So just to give you a bit of background there, that's why Dave's asking this question. He said, if Fred woke up tomorrow and was a young man who never drank whiskey and had to rebuild his knowledge, how would he go about it? Is there a succinct way to answer that one?
It's a tough one. In whiskey terms, I probably came from a privileged, in inverted commas, background in whiskey terms, because I was surrounded by it from an early age, and there were importers and customers around the home at different times, talking whiskey and drinking whiskey. I was also myself very canny and protective of myself when I was in, I'm not going to, no names, no pack drill, but I have seen guys in the whiskey business go to their bottom drawers and pull out a bottle of whiskey, which they would pour into their first tea or first coffee in order to kickstart their day, because they came into the industry late and it was a perk. And so I studiously avoided whiskey and its enjoyment. I had to taste it and try to acknowledge it, but I studiously avoided its enjoyment until I started traveling in the Far East when I was 28, 29 years of age. And I had been in the industry 10 or 11 years at that stage. Unfortunately, some 25-year-old King of Scots in a ceramic decanter in a Taiwanese nightclub at about 2 o'clock in the morning started to taste quite nice to me. And so that was my road to Damascus moment. And so I don't think I am the guy to ask, except for the fact that most young people I speak to say, who tell me they don't like Scotch whisky, I will tell them that's because you probably went and stole a bottle of a particular 3-year-old blend from your father's cupboard and you got drunk on it the first time through. And so whisky and its smell has bad connotations, as cider does for me, for the same reasons. And accordingly, you're going to have confidence in me that I can steer you away from that horrible 3-year-old blend experience, and I'll take you on a journey which will move you into orange groves and Christmas cakes and up the chimney lum, and take you away from that particular set of flavors that first made you sick.
It's a lot of responsibility on your shoulders, but you love it, you enjoy it, because you like to vicariously live that journey over again if you're like me. So there you go, Dave Cummins over there in the States, my friend. Don't worry. We're not going to be giving you 3-year-old. We're not going to be giving you anything in crazy quantities. It's going to be purely a tasting experience for you, my friend. And I hope that the times that we're going through now change enough for us to be able to rearrange that for some point in the future. Obviously, we'll stay in touch. But it's a very interesting story. Alan McLaughlin is in, a very recent patron as well. Alan, thank you so much for your recent support, my friend. He said, need to call it a night. I need to drive my wife to her work in the NHS early tomorrow. Thanks to you both. Question to follow in a separate post. Thank you for your virtual dram. As I raise a dram to you, Alan, I'm going to take the opportunity tonight. It's Thursday night. Everybody stood outside in my street tonight as well, Fred, at 8 o'clock tonight. They say the same where you are, and you heard the applause ring out up and down the country. People were banging things and whistling and things. It was emotional. It was really emotional. And the difference this week is that my wife walked out the front tonight as well, and my wife is also in the NHS. And you know, just to see that not just the frontline NHS staff, the healthcare staff, but anybody that's going out there in order to help keep our country functioning, I'm going to raise this glass just to say I think about you multiple times every day, and I know that you would prefer to be home, stuck at home like I am, and I know that I'm privileged, but I still want to raise a glass and say thank you sincerely to every one of you.
Yes. Nice. Very nicely put. And when Dave gets to that experience, I hope he enjoys it.
Yes. Well, our plan was Glengoyne. It's local. It's just got that cottage distillery feel to it. It's very picturesque. Yes. Some of the expressions that they do are nice and soft in the low 40s, and the style is soft as well. So that's the idea, just to kind of give him his first step. But if we do it correctly, and Dave goes off on his whiskey journey, I'm a little bit jealous of him, because the experiences ahead for him are wonderful. They're wonderful. But I mean, you make a very good point there when you talk about your experience in the industry, especially back in the day. We didn't have the knowledge that we have now, how easy it is to suddenly be seduced by this whiskey in a way that is darker. And I do mention it from time to time, and we always have to, awareness is the first step. We always need to know what we're enjoying and try and keep it healthy. Whiskey has changed my relationship with alcohol. It's a much more healthy relationship because I'm not simply drinking now, I'm tasting. But it's still a very potent spirit. And sometimes we need to be careful that we just don't enjoy it a wee bit too much to the point that we come to rely on it. Sunday Evening Scotch, Michael is in, he's saying, my niece is fresh out of college and just started her first professional job as a nurse a few months back, and then this hits. Cheers to her and Mrs. Aqvavitae and all frontline staff. Thank you, Michael. Absolutely, I agree fully, my friend. So, Fred, just to kind of map out the rest of the stream for you, I have hinted to you about a quiz tonight. We always finish the vPub with a quiz. We're not there yet. We've got a few minutes before we hit the quiz. But I think you're quite keen to stay with us till the end. Can I mention that the quiz might be to your liking? There may be a few indulgent questions in there.
Happy to stay with it, but I'm sure I'll be embarrassed. I may stay away in a corner.
I do enjoy taking my own quiz sometimes myself. Sometimes the community will set questions for me. And yes, you only know it if you know it, right? It's the thing. Right. I want to ask you, I want to kind of shift it a little bit now. You're an independent bottler, you're long established, you've been going, it must be coming on 70 years from the discussion that we've had tonight. More than 70 years, would that be right? 70.
Indeed, yeah. We're up 71, 72 now, yeah.
Wow. So, but now there's a few people in the chat tonight asked specifically about where you see yourself in 5 years, and they've asked specifically, like Chris Moore asked about Strathearn and your plans for Strathearn, given the fact that Strathearn was a surprise announcement to so many of us when we heard that news. And obviously, I think you're still pushing ahead with Clutha. We want to ask about Clutha. It's very important. But what I want to ask those questions in is the context of you as an independent bottler, because that's a bit of a shift for you, because then you're not just becoming a whiskey blender, a creator, an independent bottler. What you're becoming then is a distiller. Whether it's at Clutha or Strathearn, you're distilling. What's the motivation there? Is that another existential motivation, or is this just a natural progression for you?
It's got to be from a heartfelt point of view. I think there's a credibility gap to be 70 years plus in the whiskey business and not to have a distillery will seem strange to many people. I think in terms of the next 5 years, well, my next birthday, I'm 70. If Jagger is still strutting his stuff at 74, 75, I still hope to be strutting my stuff, maybe not as gracefully as Jagger, but I still hope to be strutting my stuff in the whiskey business then. And to have a distillery gives us that extra stamp of credibility. But let me say that our focus is still on the remarkable regional malts. We do want to build these brands. The single cask business is very important to us, but there will be limitations in terms of age and width of offer that we can make. So a lot of our focus and faith is put on Big Pete and Epicurean and their chums. So Strathearn came up because we have to acknowledge that Cara and Chris were very attracted to it as a small micro distillery back in 2013, 2014. We looked at buying it then, genuinely thought it was overpriced, and so we put it on the back burner. Clutha, and I'll come back to Strathearn, but Clutha has been much slower in taking off, largely because the site that we had anticipated using still got the planning permission on it, but unless SEPA, the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, give us an absolute nod of approval, it could just become a risky plot of land to purchase in terms of potential flooding. So we've got to be careful about that. So we're looking at a potential alternative site. It would be a bigger site. It would be less prestigious because we like the idea of being on the Clyde.
Clyde side, yes. Yeah.
A bit like the Morrisons, who would be directly opposite as
yes.
if it comes to pass. But we've got a contingency site in place. Now, in terms of Clutha, strangely enough, beyond the credibility, our immediate requirement is to move to larger offices. The office premises that you know are Victorian, you've visited them,
yes.
Over 4 stories, not sensibly built to be an office in today's style of operating. I own it, and I'll maybe hold on to it, but we acknowledge that we have to have bigger, better, open plan offices where there's a greater communication on one level, not across 4.
Yes.
So,
it must be wonderful for your fitness climbing up and down those stairs.
Yeah, well, that's a shame. I will just have to get on squash court, a little bit more than I do once we get into the new premises, because wherever we go, it will be open plan. But the priority is for the new office. Secondly, is to give us a bit more control on our bottling. For the last 70 years, we've subcontracted our bottlings to valued associates within the industry.
Yes.
And they can't always guarantee the shipping time or the production time to meet our requirements. I think a lot of our bottlings will stay still with these subcontractors, but some of the ones which are more timely required we'll bring into our own bottling hall. And because of that credibility factor, strangely enough, for you barflies, the distillery is third in terms of importance for what we intend to do. Clutha will be bigger, but it is more credibility focused. And to take us back to Strathearn, it was an opportunity that came up unexpected, and we thought this is as we're slowing down so much at Clutha, we've got to give ourselves a little injection of enthusiasm, and the Strathearn was a nice little baby, but it's micro.
Yes.
20,000 litres is absolutely micro.
Yes.
However, we are already, to answer one of the questions there, we're already looking at taking up the distillation probably to about 200,000 litres. So we will get there slowly but surely. It's an awkward time. We're juggling a lot of balls just now, not only in terms of the coronavirus, what we're trying to do with the Clutha, and what we're trying to put in place at Strathearn, where they also have a small bottling hall. And we're also looking at hand sanitizers out of Strathearn. So that makes sense to do it. And so there's a lot of different factors taking place just now, which in its generality covers Strathearn and Clutha.
People are asking me to ask Sevi's question, but I can't find it just now. So Sevi, if you drop it in again, I'll try to answer it. But that is interesting, and Strathearn, as you quite rightly point out, is very, very small. I think it's one of our smallest in the country, but it's still an interesting shape. So you're very much committed to distilling going forward. It's still very much part of the plan for Douglas Laing. Clutha, you're going to push forward. It's going to happen in some form at some stage. But obviously, you've the environmental issues that was widely known about that you were having some difficulties with, have continued to prove a challenge for you. Then,
yeah. What we intend to distill there will be a lowlander, but it will be very much in the Highland or lighter Speyside style. So we have our ideas and we have our experts looking at stills and the malts we're best to use, in which I have little or no input, because this is not an area of knowledge or expertise. I've always had my knowledge more on a commercial basis from the moment the whiskey was in the barrel. So I'm standing back, leaving it to a younger generation of experts.
Nicely done, nicely dodged. Sevi the Alchemist is saying, Aqvavitae, what does a typical day in the life of Fred Laing consist of at DL Towers, both in his young years and now? Has he ever been late for a squash match due to cask sampling? So I think you know who the Alchemist is, Fred, we're talking about.
Yes, well, I've had occasion to play the odd game of squash. I wouldn't go on a tennis court with the boy, but no, I know him well enough. In the old days, within Douglas Laing, and I'm going back to the 70s, it would be bizarre, because I had a little sports car then, and if we ran out of bottle caps, ROPPs, I would put the roof down in the soft top, and I would fill up the car with 6 or 8 boxes of ROPPs, which was not the smoothest looking delivery van around Glasgow. But because in the old bonded warehouse or bonded offices, above a bonded warehouse in the old Clyde side in Robertson Street, we got to know a lot of the policemen, particularly a couple of older sergeant and his mate on horseback. And whenever we heard the horses come into the garage below, I would pop down with a dram on a cold day for the sergeant, who would throw me up on his horse as he held the horse, and he would have a dram. Now, later that same day, I would be driving through Glasgow with my carload of bottle caps, and Sergeant Tommy would see me on his horseback, and he would stop the traffic and wave me through. That was the sort of stuff that would happen, because
Back in the day.
It was very hands-on, because when I was at that warehouse, I would probably have got involved in labeling some of the bottles. There were plenty of times when I had to help load a container. And in those days, you didn't load a container on pallets, you handballed them. And so you were stacking them probably 10 cases high and building a ramp down. So it was hard work being a young guy, but I was playing rugby in those days, so I was fit enough. Later in life, when we got into Douglas Laing Towers, as Sevi calls them, I would largely be the selector, although many of you may remember Jan Beckers, our malt ambassador for 10 years.
Yes.
He would laterally help me, but I would be selecting the casks. My brother did not particularly like whiskey, and so it was my privilege to get involved in the whiskey selections and writing all the tasting notes. So I would have a selection of 15 to 20 bottles once a week, which would be perhaps being tested for blending purposes. But when I was checking or confirming they were A-OK for blending purposes, I would put 3 or 4 aside because I thought they might be interesting to try. So over the next few mornings, there would be a few more bottles that would be set up for me to taste. I would come into the office at 7 o'clock, no coffee, no tea, no breakfast on my breath, and I would check out the whiskies. Of course, in order to check out the whiskies, unlike the French who would spit their wine, we have to swallow. So I would be tasting 8 to 10 whiskies and often writing tasting notes on 5 or 6 of the ones that were selected. My PA at the time knew my handwriting. She could recognize my handwriting. But the first set of nose, palate and finish were very sensibly written. But by number 6 or 8, it was a scroll. And it was a party atmosphere in in the blending room. And then at that stage, at 8:30 or 8:45, I would have my breakfast, largely to sober up, because these high strength whiskies on an empty stomach would go for me. And I do tend to drink my whiskies without water at any time. 50 plus years in the trade, I think I've got rhino hide. I've been told I have rhino hide in here, and that in order to taste a decent wine or a nice old malt, I need to take it at cask strength. So these would be my two contrasts. And yes, there have been times when I've been late for squash, thanks to sampling, which is one of the reasons I moved my sampling to first thing in the morning.
Yeah,
it's heavy.
He probably knew that, and he knew that fine well, and he wanted to ask that question for that reason. Finally, we're going to take another question from my friend Everwind. Chris, Everwind is asking, we all know whiskies open up or change after getting some air. How does a guy that selects casks account for this? Firstly, Fred, do you agree that, I mean, I've opened this Timorous Beastie tonight. I have to say, this is Moorish. This is very Moorish. There's a lovely dryness mid-palate. There's a lick of dunnage in there. Even at 18 years old, I'm getting a little bit of dusty dunnage. It's very seductive. I'm really enjoying this, and it's very much my style of whiskey. I'm very much enjoying this, but I think that this bottle is only going to get better as the level drops and it starts to relax and open up and breathe a little bit. Would you agree, or would you say that things tend to be quite static in whiskey?
Two things. I'd like you to spell Moorish. I use it quite often in my tasting notes, and I don't know if there's a double O or a hyphen in it. Is it MORE-ISH, which does not?
I would spell it like that, but I wouldn't put the hyphen in. But now you're making me doubt myself.
Okay, look, that's just an aside. Sorry, Roy. I actually got the impression that the question was based on opening up in a glass as opposed to in the bottle. In the glass, some of these older whiskies, I'm very prepared to leave 20-25 minutes, and we'll notice over a 20-25 minute window some incredible changes on the nose. That will similarly happen over a 10-15 minute window as you enjoy the palate. Always remembering, of course, to enjoy the finish and chew out those particular flavors. I'm less, well, I don't know the science behind that, but I do wonder if you were actually meaning the bottle, that the contents of the bottle changing. I'm not a great believer in the softening in the bottle. I'm more of a believer that if you've got a whiskey, say like the Timorous Beastie you've got just now, and if you are a compulsive, quality controlled nerd, anorak, geek, as you've been using the terminology there, and I would be doing as some of the German guys I know do. They would decant maybe 50% of that bottle into a 35 centiliter bottle, keep that and enjoy the rest of it so that you're drinking it fresh. I've noticed in some of the older samples I go back to where there's maybe only an inch in the bottle and it's been open for too long. Like for me commercially, too long is 6 weeks, but in essence, too long, I think, is probably 10 months, 12 months. I think the softening effect for me personally at that stage, in that last half inch, means it should have been finished 3 to 5 months earlier. That's a personal thing.
And you've already mentioned that you're clearly the type who enjoys the vibrance and power and the boldness that a cask strength brings. So you're really looking for that connection when you're enjoying your whiskey, right? And if it's softened, if it's rounded out, if it's relaxed a little bit, you're starting to feel that whiskey is leaving you. Whereas I'm very much one of the folk who really enjoy the change. I enjoy seeing how a whiskey might change from what we call the neck pour over as it drops over the shoulder and down into the whiskey itself. And by the time you get down to the heel at the bottom, you might, now, could very much, as we all understand, it could very much be that your own palate has changed over the journey of that bottle, of course. But it feels like the whiskey is changing, and it's one of the things that I really embrace and enjoy. I love that idea.
Yeah. For me, one of the joys of this glass will be after I leave it overnight without washing it, washing it tomorrow, but putting my nose in it, catching yesterday's flavors and nuances and characteristics, because they can be so different the next day.
I love to hear you saying that, because I justify it to my wife. I call it the lazy git. And what it is my drams from the night before are sitting there, and I will wash them. I'll take care of them myself. I'm not expecting somebody else to clean up after me, but before they get washed, I do spend time. Sometimes I'll cover them, and I'll take the cover off the next day, and you've got this concentrated. And the smells are, I mean, it's not a good idea to want to be pouring a dram at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, right? But it's just wonderful to, before you clean the glasses, to just extract that last bit of pleasure out of what that dram gave up for you, right?
For sure, for sure.
Fred, we're gonna move into the quiz now, which is naturally kind of just the show wrapping up and things. It's kind of the quiz at the end is kind of our bookmark. Believe it or not, we had up close to 300 folk in tonight. We've still got over 200 with us, even this late in Europe. It's obviously coming on for 25 to 1 in the morning, but loads of folks stay for the quiz. Yes.
Very impressive.
Yes, they like to stay and have a bit of fun at the quiz. It's like it's almost like being at the pub and squeezing the last moments out before they ring that bell and give us our marching orders. So if you are comfortable where you're sitting, Fred, if you would like to stay with us for the quiz, I'd very much welcome you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. And after the stream is finished and things, you're welcome to stay on and have a bit of a debrief, because I know this is fascinating to you, and I know that you're very interested in it all, and I'm happy to talk to you a wee bit more. I'd like to say thank you to everybody. Some of you will dip out, the ones that are not interested in the quiz, but I encourage you to stay and have a bit of fun. It's a multiple choice quiz. It's only you playing against yourself. You're keeping your own score. There's no prizes at stake. It's just for a bit of kind of personal learning, a bit of fun, and hopefully to pique a bit of curiosity in you. I usually tell everybody that I've made the quiz a bit easier tonight. I think I have, genuinely, but there is a couple of questions in there that are intended to potentially be banana skin questions, of course. That's what it's all about. Last week, there was 2 people managed to get, or the last quiz, which was Sunday night, 2 people managed to get a remarkable 10 out of 10 score. And I wish everybody the best of luck in getting some way towards that tonight. Fred, you can play along if you like. All I'll ask is that if you know the answer, you keep it to yourself. And at the appropriate point, I'll ask you what you think it might be, and if you're guessing or if you know it for sure. But it's a pleasure to have you joining along for the quiz tonight. Who's going to help me run the quiz? I've got Steve A in. I've got, I don't know if Whiskey Jason is in. Anybody who's willing to help me give a bit of definition, it always helps when I can see in the chat. Good luck, everybody. And let's see if we can make this quiz work. Hopefully you can see that, Fred.
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Question 1. Which of these island distilleries is the most visited? So unfortunately not this year. It's a very, very difficult time, but and under normal conditions, which of these island distilleries would you expect to be the most footfall? Would it be A, Arran, B, Talisker, or C, Lagavulin? A, Arran, B, Talisker, C, Lagavulin. So what's interesting is I think the distillery that has the biggest footfall of these 3 is said to be actually the busiest in Scotland now, which is fascinating to my ears. But there we go. And the crowd are all over the place on this one. There's A's, there's B's, there's C's. Nigel Slynn thinks B for Talisker. Andreas thinks B also. Gino is thinking it's Lagavulin. Greg's Whiskey Guide thinks it's A, and so does Graham Young and Jeffrey Pellegrini. And I can tell you that the most popular of the distilleries that on this list, by some margin, Fred, would you like to guess?
Aaron?
Spot on. Absolutely, Aaron. Over 100,000 visitors. And Aaron are currently making plans for 2021 and beyond, because they'll have the Lochranza in the north and Lag in the south, to accommodate up to 200,000 visitors a year to their distilleries. Quite amazing. Aaron, you've actually got to take a ferry to get to Aaron. Of course, any island distilleries, I guess, would be true of that fact, but it's amazing that they can have the biggest footfall in Scotland. Question 2. Douglas Laing Co was founded when? The 40s, the 50s, or the 60s? A, the 40s, B, the 50s, C, the 60s. Anybody that's been paying attention to Fred's wonderful narration tonight will know this surely after what we've heard. This should be a freebie question for everyone. Quite amazing. When was Gordon MacPhail founded, Fred?
There's so many generations. I think I'm going to say something like 1895.
Yep. So late 1900s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You will probably know.
No, I think it was, I actually thought it was early 20th century. I really wasn't sure. It popped into my head as I was thinking about it there. I know that Cadenheads was 19th century, but I wasn't sure if G&M was as well. But everybody in the quiz, everybody without any exception, has answered A for the 40s. Fantastic. Question 3. What is the name of the distillery manager at Glasgow's Clydeside Distillery? And I apologise in advance for this question. Is it A, Donald McAllister? Is it B, Alistair Donaldson? Or is it C, Alistair MacDonald? Ex Centauri Beam, ex Bamor, ex Auchentoshan, now in situation at Glasgow's Clydeside Distillery. Just having a bit of fun there. Have you been down to Clydeside, Fred? Have you had a wee look at the place yet?
Yeah, yes, indeed. Tim and Andrew had us round last year, and very impressive and very nice it is too. And very embarrassing for me because I cannot honestly answer ABC, although I met him that day. So I'm going to ease myself out of responding to this one.
I can tell you it's a bit of a cheeky question. I did apologise at the advance, but clearly I'm hoping that most of the folk in here, and I can see that most of them do indeed know that it's C. It's Alistair MacDonald is currently running things down there on Clydeside as well. I recommend that anybody that's in Glasgow go and take a wee tour of the distillery as well. They've got a decent shop down there as well. They also do some food and things, and it's a nice little spot to go because they have spent a bit of time talking about Glasgow and its role in the whisky industry and the history that it has. And I think that's very important. And I have no doubt, Fred, that you'll have a similar idea to pay a tribute to Glasgow's part in whisky. Question 4, which distillery has an association with giraffes? A, Glenturret, B, Glenmorangie, or C, Glendronach? Which has an association with giraffes? I am hoping this is a fairly straight one. Silverloch Whisky Club has been so fast on the keyboard, he's managed to find the emoji for a giraffe, and he's put in a giraffe emoji. Fantastic. Jean de la Cuisine is admitting that he doesn't have a clue, but the rest of the barflies are absolutely all over it. The stills at this distillery are known as the giraffes, and incidentally they also have a lot of their branding recalling some of the colours of a giraffe, that orange and dark brown and black colouring, and it is of course Glenmorangie. Sorry, Fred, I should have given you an opportunity to answer, but you had that. Yes.
Until you talked of still shape, I was thinking of wandering beasts in the car park, so I was all over the place too.
Yes, fairly tenuous, but they are known as the giraffes, aren't they? The stills up there in Tain, and yes, and if you go to the distillery, you pick up that there's kind of little giraffe Easter eggs and themes around the place. So yes, I'm speaking about Glenmorangie. Let's move on to question 5, which is always the picture question, and we're looking at a coastal distillery here. Quite a striking image, quite a striking facade of the distillery there. And of course, I'm just going to ask you which distillery we're looking at. Is it A, Talisker? Is it B, Taninic? Or is it C, Scapa? What are we looking at here? Now, Fred, I know that you may want to shout and tell me what that is, but I'm asking you just to hold your water for a wee bit. See what the folks come up with. I'm always impressed by these folk in the crowd. There is literally nobody going anywhere other than C, suggesting that it's Scapa. Fred, what would you think?
I think in terms of the cliff, I would also be going for Scapa, but I've never been up there before.
I have not visited either. But if I go to the last image here, you'll see that I just photoshopped out the letter there. We are indeed looking at Scapa. I think we may have some high scoring in the quiz tonight. Well done, everybody. I couldn't fool you with that one at all. Question 6. Binks, the wire-haired terrier who inspired the Scallywag branding, I should have said fox terrier, I think, is remarkable in having what? A, only one ear. B, only one eye. C, only one front tooth. Binks, the wire-haired fox terrier who inspires the Scallywag branding, is remarkable in having what? Only one ear, only one eye, or only one front tooth. I've got a wee picture of him here. The monocle-wearing wire-haired fox terrier. And of course, absolutely everybody is shouting and screaming. Jimmy Legg is saying he's gone. Nope, you're clearly back with us. Everybody is screaming, see that indeed Binks.
Hey, come here.
And the packaging recalls his one tooth. Who do we have? Do we have Cooper? Now, they're not related in any way, are they?
No, he's got all his teeth.
He's got all his teeth. I wonder if he knows his name. Cooper?
Who's that? I think he's catching you.
Just about. Question 7. Well done if you answered C for only one tooth, of course. Which of these distilleries allocates about a quarter of its output to 40 to 55 ppm peated production? So peated production, about a quarter of its output in the order of 40 to 45 ppm. Are we talking about Knockdhu? Are we talking about Tomatin? Or are we talking about Nakandhu? Which of those distilleries puts a quarter of its production into fairly heavily peated malt spirit? I knew this, but I was shocked to discover just how much of it they actually dedicated until I thought about it for a wee while, about who the owner is and why it's important to them to have it. Lots of people saying A or C. Marku Makinen is saying A or C. Knockdhu or Nakandhu. Nathan Clark thinks it's B for its Kuboken, Tomatin's Kuboken. Lots of people think it's Tomatin and lots of people saying B. And yes, at Tomatin they do make a peated malt, but is it 40 to 45 ppm and is it a quarter? What would you guess, Fred?
I would be going for Tomatin because of the Japanese ownership, that it might be attractive for them for something over there rather than something over here. But
well, wait, Tomatin has been making a peated product. What it tends to do is it tends to shut down its production and switch its production over to making Kuboken for a couple of weeks a year, and they've expanded that year on year on year. But they don't make anything like a quarter. I mean, Tomatin is up to about 5 million litres capacity. A quarter of it, that'd be over 1 million litres of peated. It's not anything like that Kuboken. And it's only about 10 to 15 or 20, I think, at the top ppm. It's a much lighter peated spirit. What I'm actually looking for is Knockdhu, which of course is Anok, which makes products like Peat Heart and all the peated releases they've had over the years as well. And if you think of the owners of that distillery, they don't have a lot of peated product under their roof in their house. So they obviously dedicate a quarter of their production to heavily peated malt. I think that was a banana skin for a few people. Per Christensen is saying it was a banana skin. Quite a few people not very happy about that one. Looks like I've caught out Sevi as well with that one as well. So there you go, Knockdhu, quarter of their production heavily peated. Question 8. Which of these is a distillery in California? Okay, I'm going to get hate mail now. Is it A, George Saint Distilling Inc., B, St. George Spirits, or C, St. George's Distillery? Which one of those is a distillery in California? I've actually got a bottle over my shoulder here. I'll grab it while you're all chewing that over. This is a bottle of their breaking and entering product, American whiskey. I've not opened it yet. This is from my friend Bill in California. But I'm asking who made this product, breaking and entering, and what is the name of the distillery? You're going to get a wee bit annoyed with me here, I know that. Is it George Saint Distilling, St. George Spirits, or St. George's Distillery? What would you guess, Fred? You would be guessing, because I know that world whiskies are not your thing.
I would be. But I think, being American, they would go for the George Saint Distilling Inc. I think they like the idea of incorporating.
Yes.
I would be going as a guess for A.
Unfortunately, I have to say George Saint Distilling Inc. is a figment of my imagination. St. George's Distillery exists in Norfolk in England, but St. George Spirits is in, I think it's called Alameda or something in California. So anybody that said B, give himself a point. And I know I'm going to get hate for that because there were so many people going for A's or C's. So I do apologize. Willie Dolier is upset with me. Polyester Landscape is I think that's Tim, is suggesting that he got it right. He's saying score, so he's quite happy about that. Fantastic. Question 9, second to last question. The remarkable regional malt from Douglas Laing using Campbelltown malt is called what? So we're looking for the name of their remarkable regional malt that uses Campbelltown malt. Is it A, Rock Oyster, B, the Gauldrons, or C, Rock Island? I'm going to pour another dram of this Timorous Beastie, Fred. I am very, very much enjoying it.
That's great.
And Sevi, I have to say, I'll take my hat off to you, my friend. You were absolutely spot on with this one. It's a cracker. It's very much my style of whiskey as well.
Nice to hear at this time of night. Thanks, Roy.
I'm sorry?
Nice to hear at this time of night. Thank you.
Yes. I wonder, is this one still available, the 18-year-old Timorous Beastie? I mean, this is
I'll have to check this. I cannot.
Probably not.
I'd have to double check.
One of 7,000 or so, just over 7,000 bottles. Yeah.
I'll check. We'll let you know tomorrow.
199 in the chat, Ben Demon Hunter says. So we're still up at the 200. There's 200 watching now, 200 people even hanging on till the bitter end for the quiz. You're just wonderful people. I love hanging out on Thursdays with you, and I'm very privileged to be able to hang out with you on Sunday nights now as well. I wish it wasn't in the context and the conditions that we're living under, but there we have it. Chris B is saying it's still available on Master of Malt. And Whiskey Novice Jim is saying, surely Rock Oyster doesn't exist anymore. Jim, you're spot on. You're absolutely right. You got your knuckles wrapped earlier in the live stream. But we understand completely why you would say Rock Oyster, because that's the batches that you've come to love. And of course, I can tell you that B, the Gauldrons, which is probably the lesser seen remarkable regional malt. And it's pretty clear to see why, right? There's not a lot of parcels of stock around of Campbelltown.
And anything that we had was being used in other blended scotches. We have now taken any stock we had from Campbelltown out of our regular scotches, and whereas initially we only released, I think, 2 small bottlings every year, our stocks, as we remove them from one area, are coming into flow much easier. So it is now a constant in our price list. So it's regularly out there as opposed to being released in small batches.
Interesting, very interesting, and good to hear as well. I'm looking at Graham Young on 9 out of 9. I'm looking at Dancing Midgie, Multi Haggis Muncher. Dancing Midgie, Glenn, my friend, I thank you very much for the recent samples of Glenn Goyne's Duncan's Dram. I'm going to open and enjoy one of those on the stream on Sunday night on the vPub. I'm looking forward to that. Multi Haggis Muncher, no, you're only on 8 out of 9, my friend, but a couple of you already on 9 out of 9. I'm just going to try and see if anybody else is able to. Daniel Vermaas, you star, well done. Also claiming a 9 out of 9. Very, very well done. So let's see if question 10 is going to be me being kind to you on this Thursday night vPub quiz, or am I throwing a banana skin right at the end? I'm trying to remember what kind of question it was. Let's just have a look and see. Oh no, it's a banana skin. Okay, the marketing genius said to be behind Macallan's success famously leveraged advertising space where? Fascinating story. But there was two guys at Macallan. There was the guy that headed it up, and he recruited a marketing genius. This was back in the 70s, and they turned Macallan from an unknown brand to what it is today, or they started it, and they started very, very well. But where did he buy advertising space? Famous story. Was it A, covers of in-flight magazines, B, next to the Times crossword, or was it C, golf scorecards all across Europe? Was it in-flight magazines, next to the Times crossword, or golf scorecards? I'm talking about a guy called Hugh Metcalf was the marketing guy alongside Willie Phillips, who was famous for deciding that Macallan could become a significant large brand under its own right, pull it away from making stock for blends and make it, and look at what's happened over the last 40 or so years with Macallan. It's quite unbelievable. Not many of us drink Macallan anymore. It's difficult to get and good quality at a good price. Of course, that's just me, I should say. Do you have any idea, Fred? Do you know about this?
I have a feeling it's the Times crossword I've read, and there was also a third party to that pair of Metcalf and Willie. And was there not a Hollywood involvement as well?
Or was there now?
Yeah,
no, that's interesting.
A Hollywood director who was a kind of third leg to that tripod. You might want to be able to find that out. And I almost had his name there, but he was a film director behind it as well. Not behind the advertising or the promotion, but behind the ownership of the company and the brand at that time. One to check out.
I'm getting a row from people in the chat saying this is an asshat question. I fully accept it. There were so many of you 9 out of 9. Let's see how many of you managed to get it through to 10 out of 10. Fred is absolutely spot on. Absolutely, he bought advertising space next to the Times crossword, and it was very, very successful. And I believe, compared to other advertising space at the time, pretty affordable as well. Interesting that a third party involved there, the Hollywood connection there, Fred. I'm going to need to do some reading and see what that is. I've just made Jimmy Legg sad. I'm wondering if I've made anyone else. Stuart Triquetra's on 9. Silverloss Whiskey Club is not too happy about the quiz tonight. Jens Roger Christofferson, 9. Well done, great score. Anybody managed to scrape? I'm looking for Daniel. I'm looking for Dancing Midgie. Peter Box got 10 out of 10 with 2 good guesses. Well done, Peter. Fantastic score. Let's see if I can pull up your comment there. Oops, that was Andrew. It skipped. Peter, where are you? There you are there. I'm trying to see if anyone else has managed a 10 out of 10 tonight.
Well done, Peter. Well done.
B for Banana Skin. Daniel Vermast also managed to bag a 10 out of 10 as well. Well done, Daniel. Excellent stuff.
Have I not seen Daniel before on a label somewhere?
He does have the whiff of the Big Pete about him. I'm not sure that's our Daniel. I've met Daniel. He's a big guy. He's 6.5 feet tall, I think. But I'm not sure that's him. But it does look very Big Pete-esque. Anyone else on 10 out of 10? I don't want to miss you if you manage to get it over the line. I apologize if you have managed 10 out of 10 tonight and I've missed you. Fantastic stuff. I hope that was some fun for you, Fred. I hope there was something of interest there. You did very well. You certainly got a pass mark, no problem.
I I think I got 2.
Oh no, I think you got more than that. Any I threw at you, I think bar one you managed no problem at all. Fred, can I make a comment on something? I have to say that it's not just been a privilege to have you on and been enjoyable and really informative and very, very interesting. It's been very, very soothing and relaxing for me. And that's not normally the state that I'm in on these things. I've enjoyed it very, very much. And I think that from what I've picked up from the chat, I think the barflies and whiskey folk that have tuned in have very much enjoyed it as well. I think that you might be asked to consider joining us for other topics again in the future. I hope you've had a comfortable time and enjoyed yourself too.
Not nearly as frightening as I anticipated, and every bit as fascinating as I thought it would be. So I congratulate you all and say hello to all the barflies who are still up at this ridiculous time at night. Thank you for bearing with me, and thanks, Roy, for walking me through it. It's been great. I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
It's been an absolute privilege and a pleasure to have spent time with you in the past, and of course to have welcomed you in this environment as well, Fred, and I sincerely hope it's not the last time. For everybody that's tuned in, there's been so many of you supporting generally in the recent vPubs, but tonight was especially busy. Thank you all for your patience. I do apologize if I didn't get any shout outs, if I didn't take your questions. You can imagine that it's difficult, and we could have stayed here well into the wee hours talking to Fred and getting his insight and his input. I apologize if I did indeed miss your questions. It'll be a pleasure for me to hang out with you again on Sunday night, a completely free, open public vPub again on Sunday. It's the only thing that I find I'm able to do to help in any way in these times when everybody's cooped up at home, looking for some time to pour a wee dram and have a bit of whiskey community together. I'm going to raise this glass. And I'm going to make a toast, and I'm going to toast. This was Jean de la Cuisine in the chat tonight mentioned this, and I think it's a perfect way to close out, Fred. I'm going to raise a glass to Fred Laing and say thank you so much for hanging out with us tonight. Thank you for all your insight. Thank you for your years of service to whiskey. And I hope that you continue indeed to move like Jagger.
So I'm not allowed to drink on this one myself, but thank you very much. And I will continue to move like Jagger.
Thank you. Sláinte, my friend. Thank you so much.
All the best. Thanks, everybody.
And to everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. And I very much look forward to seeing you at the Lockdown Whisky Festival on Saturday afternoon, 2 till 5 p.m. on the Tomatin Distillery channel. It's not on my channel, as I keep saying, and also on our vPub on Sunday night as well. Please leave comments and questions for Fred in the video, not the live chat, but underneath this video. The comments will be there forever, and Fred and his team can go in and handle and answer any questions that you might have for him. Thank you all so much. I love you all. You're fantastic people. I look forward to seeing you very, very soon. Good night.